Welcome, everyone. My name is Brittany Todd, and I'm a member of the Fabric Leadership Team. Thank you all for joining us today for Mastering Fabric Tips and Tricks webinar series led by Michael Stealey and Komal Thareja. Before we begin, I would like to share a few housekeeping items. You can move to the next slide, please. The webinar will include a live question and answer session following the presentation. Please note that the chat feature has been disabled. If at any point you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer it during the Q&A session. Last, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants. Please go to the next slide. We are joined today by our presenters, Komal Thareja and Michael Stealey. Komal holds a significant role as the lead software architect and developer across multiple projects supported by the U.S. National Science Foundation, the NSF, including Fabric. As a software engineer at RINSI, she brings to the table her expertise in database applications, cloud orchestration, distributed systems, and scalable computing. Komal is not only instrumental in shaping the control software for next-generation networks and experimental testbeds like Fabric, but also plays a crucial role as a key contributor to the Jupyter examples utilized for interacting with Fabric, as well as the user-facing API FabLib. Prior to her current scientific endeavors, she amassed extensive corporate experience focusing on architecting and implementing applications within the mobile communications industry. Michael Stealey is a distributed systems software engineer at RINSI who has helped to create and maintain many of the backend Fabric services, including Artifact Manager. I will now pass it to Michael to start the presentation.
Hello, I should be unmuted at this point, one would hope. All right, my name is Michael Stealey, and I'm going to be talking about Artifact Manager today, which kind of leads us into the first question of what exactly is Artifact Manager? In short, I'd say Artifact Manager is a platform for storing and sharing files used to generate or reproduce Fabric-related research. Artifact Manager is an API-driven service that uses Fabric credentials to determine user access rights, as well as the sharing level permissions that get assigned to them. And then a simple UI is available as a front-end service to that back-end API. And the system is running live currently at artifacts.fabric-testbed.net. If you want to take a look there, feel free, and we'll be getting more into that as this presentation goes forward. So who can create artifacts? At this time, any active Fabric user who participates in one or more projects, which is the same criteria that we use for JupyterHub access, is allowed to create an artifact. Once an artifact is created, that creator can assign any number of additional authors to the artifact as long as those additional authors are also active Fabric users. And then once you're an author, all authors have equal rights to kind of manage and maintain that artifact. And what does that mean they can do? Well, they can edit, so all aspects of the artifact. So there's titles and descriptions that are short and long, and visibility, and references and tags and other things that are in there that we'll talk more about as this presentation goes forward. Something else that can be done is if you want to create something, you might also want to delete it. Currently, we have delete reserved for only the original creator, and eventually that delete will kind of migrate itself into a more of a soft delete, or like a retirement of an artifact as opposed to a full deletion, just so we can preserve referential integrity as things go forward and more of these things start to populate. And then the key part to the artifact is the contents, right? So there's these idea of version contents that can be uploaded by any author in the form of a tarball. Why tarballs? Well, let's talk about that. So at this time, any file or any set of files can be compressed and zipped up into like a tarball. And this is right now what we're considering as the basis of an artifact. So max file size of about 300 megabytes. We can and that as time goes forward, and file type of .tgz or .tar or .targz or anything that represents a tarball. What's important here is the contents aren't necessarily scanned at all by anything on the backend service side. So users should take care in what they decide to package up and to place in there. So no private keys or tokens or other secret types of information should be stuffed in there. And then, there's ideas for future iterations of Artifact Manager that'll connect to GitHub repositories, or even be able to generate DOIs and create endpoints in something like Zenodo. So the idea of the artifact is, say you're on JupyterHub and doing some work and you have this set of files and you want to collect them and share them. A tool like Artifact Manager allows you to bundle those up into a tarball and then publish them to the Artifact Manager for others to be able to download or pull over to their JupyterHub container and be able to share. So that's all well and good, but how does Artifact Manager know who I am? Like, how is it figuring out, who has access to what? Artifact Manager is going to use the same authentication workflow as the rest of Fabric. And then locally, it'll set a very short-lived session for an API user to be able to kind of access and do things with. So session access is refreshed on a regular basis based on the cookie or token that's received. And then for the local API user, sets that so that they have a couple minutes worth of activity they can do before it goes back and checks again. So there's a continuing cycle of looking at either the cookie or token that Artifact Manager receives. Then on your behalf, it'll go back and ensure that everything there is valid, create a short-lived token locally, use that, do the work you need to do, and kind of rinse and repeat. And in this instance, browser cookies and or credential manager tokens are treated equivalently by the Artifact Manager. So whether you're interacting with it from the browser or interacting with it from the API using a credential manager issued token, the permissions and access rights you have should be entirely equal. Now, looking at, say, from the inside view of Artifact Manager, on the left, we have in the red outline, what an anonymous user would look like, right? This is a service that exists on the internet. So anonymous users are going to hit it, and this is how they look to Artifact Manager, right? So they have no real identity. They can't create an artifact. They have this very kind of generic UUID that doesn't, map back to anything. They're just an anonymous user. Once they go through the Fabric authentication workflow, the information about them gets populated, right? So what type of access they're coming in with, either cookie or token, what kind of CI logon credentials maybe they use to get in there, what kind of roles they have within Fabric, whether they're able to create artifacts is listed there, and then the projects they participate in. So this set of information is held locally under a short-lived session that allows them to kind of do what they need to do and get in and get out. So how do these permissions work? Okay, great. I have tokens. I can interact with Artifact Manager. I can create an artifact. What if I'm not ready to share this thing with the world? Like, what do I do? Initially, we've decided that there's probably 3 levels of base permissions that should cover most of what people would be interested in. And by default, things start off in author position or permissions, and that's the most restrictive. So when you create an artifact, you are the first author. You can add additional authors as you want. And if you leave the visibility set to author, only artifact authors can then view the artifact or download the version contents. So that's good for small teams that are working on something maybe kind of privately before they get ready to release it. That's a safe way to kind of work on something without have a lot of eyes prying in on you. The second use case may be having a visibility at the project level. So maybe 1 or 2 authors are in there and say this is a class scenario. TAs are putting together an artifact that they want to share with the class. Well, once published, the artifact authors, of course, have full access, but if it's set to a project and that project is identified, then any other members of that project would be able to see and would be able to download or access those contents. They wouldn't be able to edit, only authors can edit, but that project team or anybody who participates in that project would have this artifact viewable to them. And then finally, there's the public level of visibility, and this is like the least restrictive. So anyone, including anonymous users, can view and download all contents. And again, a reminder that only authors, the ones that are listed explicitly as authors, are the ones that can edit the artifact and add new content versions or enable or disable contents from being viewable by others. So it was mentioned that this is predominantly an API with some lightweight UI access on the front end. It's an API-based service, and it does offer a simple, this is written in Django, so a Django templated UI for more conventional browser-based access. So from the UI, you can have a couple different views. There's a view that's just all the artifacts, and then perform a simple search across title, tag, or project name. It's a join search, hits all three of those. And then there's an alternate view that gives you a view by author with, again, simple search across the author name, and you can drill down on any of those. So if you see the author that you're interested in, you click the author's name, and then it opens up all artifacts that that author had participated in. Or conversely, if you see an artifact and you click that artifact, it drills you down into the detailed view of what that artifact holds. And then more importantly, this was designed to kind of be an API at the heart. So from the API point of view, we've chosen to visually expose this using a few different formats. On the left side there, you see a Swagger UI, which is an open API specification meant to kind of help standardize API integration or interaction. But what this allows you to do as the user with your cookie credential from the browser, you can interact with the Swagger API if you want to learn how this may interact or may be portable to, say, code you write locally, right? So it gives you the exposure to the API and what the return type should be kind of in a visual format. So it makes then developing against it a bit easier down the road. Because this is Django and uses a Django REST framework, we also have exposed a Django REST framework view, which is kind of the middle picture there. And then as well as a redoc view, which is an auto-generated documentation tool meant to assist developers in learning about the API. And then the intent behind exposing the API in such a way is that we hope Fabric users may take advantage of what expertise they have and maybe develop tools on their own that could eventually be shared back to the community. So simple UI on the front with an API exposed on the back. All the credentials and permissions and everything is managed based on the cookie that you give to it or the token that you give to it, and then kind of go back and forth from there. So taking a step further, putting these two concepts together, the exposed UI is just simply a client of the API itself. So the Django templated UI was written to make API calls. So it's not operating on its database objects locally. It's making all of its calls through the API, getting JSON responses back, and then rendering that view for the user. So the user has how this flow kind of works is the user authenticates through that CI logon, and the browser sets a cookie in their browser. The cookie is then passed into the API on the user's behalf. The API then dereferences this into an API user object by making calls to other internal Fabric services. And then that resultant API user object is used to determine the access rights and or permissions that that user has within the artifact manager. So it keeps kind of Fabric integrity kind of, consistent kind of across all the services that Fabric uses by using a common OIDC client endpoint. So in this example here, you're querying a particular artifact in the UI, and that user is actually, going against the back end. So on the left-hand side, we see a visual representation, kind of what that JSON response would be from the right-hand API call. And then when it's in a template, you can kind of pack it together with a number of other buttons and other such things that would represent future API calls should the user click those things. So, just kind of a simple viewpoint of how this thing was put together. So maybe it's time to jump into an example. So what if I want to interact with the API directly? How do I do that? I'll go through a couple examples using curl because everybody loves curl. Probably not, but it's about as low level as we can get and kind of remain at the command line. So it should be relatively easy to port to any language of your choice. So with this series of examples, I'll look at getting a list of artifacts, and then we'll get a specific artifact. And then we'll post some new content to the existing artifact, and then get that newly uploaded content in both a successful and a failed way to kind of show how these tokens react. So the first one here, getting a list of artifacts. I want to export a couple environment variables. So this thing called ID token is what was taken out of Credential Manager. So if you've ported your Credential Manager ID token into JupyterHub before, it's the same thing. So it'd be exactly that same ID token that you would get from there. And then exporting kind of the API URL, because I'm lazy and didn't want to type that a bunch, so it just kind of abstracts it into API URL. So using the ID token as the bearer token, and remember, be careful with tokens, right? Because anyone who has possession of your ID token would be given the same access rights as you, right? So the idea behind the bearer token is, whoever the bearer of this token is has the access of what that token provides. So those should be kept kind of private within your environment. And then we go ahead and get the artifacts endpoint, and it's JSON, and you get a big blob of JSON back, and that's the right-hand side. And then you use a parser of your choice to make that less obnoxious to look at, right? So this is the same kind of output that's going back and forth that the UI is then rendering as a list of artifacts. So from that blob, say we pulled out a specific artifact. In this case, the one that's referenced by Jupyter examples here. And we kind of export that into the environment as an artifact UUID. So we can then interrogate kind of that API backend again using the artifact UUID at the end of the artifacts endpoint, again providing the bearer token. And this time you get back a little cleaner set of JSON on the right, because I've parsed it using JQ. But an equivalent representation of that is kind of on the left as far as what the UI sees, right? So the UI makes that query based on your behalf, kind of come back. You can do the same thing through curl, get the same information back. So now we've gone from a list of artifacts to a single artifact. And this single artifact currently has 2 content versions set in it. So say we wanted to add a third. How would we do that? Well, because this is curl, things tend to get a little bit uglier from the API point of view, because it's expecting a multi-part form post. So we'll define what a local file is. So say you have your tarball sitting locally. Say it's something called jupyterexamples.tgz. We have the artifact UUID. And then there's a couple more things that we need to add here. One is a storage type, and for all intents and purposes, these are all going to be Fabric at this time, because that's all we have. And then the storage repo is going to be Rency, because that's where those files are being stored at. So those are always going to be the case for now. So we put that together along with the bearer token, post it up, and give it a moment to push up about 300 megabytes worth of stuff. And you get a response back that gives you the details of the new contents as well as a URN. And that URN then defines what is callable. So now from the previous slide, we went from 2 to now we have 3 different content versions up there. And with the information we got back, we now have a URN that we can pull against. So for the final part of this example, we'll go ahead and pull or try to get that newly created content version. So using the URN, we can now get or download that newly created content. So that URN is broken into some parts that uniquely identify the version contents. So there's that storage type, storage repo, and UUID. So that's like a logical representation of what the contents are without explicitly giving a download location, which allows us then on the back end to migrate these things if we ever need to, but keeping the URN reference continually the same. So package this up, go to the contents download, give it the contents URN. The first time we don't provide a bearer token. So we go ahead and send out the request. We wanted to save as new contents.tgz. So looking at the the console output on the right-hand side, we can see that that call was successful. So, it does not fail, but on closer inspection, it can be seen that that output file is really small. We know it should be large. So reading the contents of that output file, it exposes that, there was a validation error and that the API user does not have permission to download the file. In a real scenario, we'd be looking at the status code of this and, redirect the user based on failed versus successful output. But because we explicitly told curl to output the results into that file, that's exactly what it did. So the next attempt is when we add our bearer token back in there. So because that artifact was protected by being author level visibility, if I did not provide a token stating exactly who I was, it didn't let it pass, it blocked it. So the next time I'll add the bearer token in there that identifies me, which then gets dereferenced into one of the authors and allows it to pass through. So that attempt to get contents by URN and store the output news contents is successful. But now we can see that that file is quite large. It's about 295 megabytes. And then extracting the file reveals the original JupyterHub examples directory, which contains all the content from the original artifact. That may be enough fun with curl for today, but this is hopefully a baseline of how one might expand this into something, say, like JupyterHub or local file system, or just whatever your language of choice may be. That if you have a bearer token or just your credential manager token to pass along with it, or even the cookie that you get from the browser, that you can remotely interact with the artifact manager and push things and pull things and modify things kind of based on what's going on there. So this is our first round of working with the artifact manager. So, we're looking for feedback and we want people to more or less go break it. So what's next for artifact manager? We're looking at adding more and better documentation because it's needed. There's not much out there now. So we are in the process of writing that. Migrating that simple UI to something that's more embedded within the portal directly, so that the user does not have to go to a separate site to interact with it. And then, as mentioned briefly earlier, we're looking at adding additional content types to where the artifact manager can interact with GitHub repositories on the user's behalf and be able to kind of push things and pull things in that route, as well as creating DOI'd content through Zenodo and creating artifacts that way that have some permanence that people can move in and out. And then adding some metric information to it, because this is something that's viewed and pulled and downloaded, it would probably be interesting to get a view count per content version, and then total, as well as an artifact download count, again, per content version, and then total for the entire history of all contents of that artifact. And then proving search capability beyond simple search. And then FabLib integration, which is already a thing. Komal will talk about that in a moment. And then JupyterHub integration, just kind of a precursor. Hi, Komal, you'll get to do that soon. And then some client tooling for automated features, and then just collecting user feedback as we go to kind of see what would be usable by Fabric users or what would be interesting or usable. We're happy to try to add that in if it makes sense to do so. And I believe with that, it might be time to move into something that's a little more hands-on with a JupyterHub demo with Komal. All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Komal, and I'll walk you through how we can use Jupyter Artifact Manager through JupyterHub. I'm right now on the portal screen. Just giving you a brief walkthrough of how you can access it through the portal. I'm logged in, so I can directly go to the Experiments tab, and then we have a link here for Artifacts Manager. You can go to that tab and open Artifact Manager there. As you can see, all the artifacts we have published are visible here. Most of them are pushed by the Fabric team, but there are a couple of artifacts pushed by other users as well. Let me go to the JupyterHub and show how you can use it there. I'm sharing a screen where the JupyterHub login screen shows up here. Right now, the Jupyter Artifact Manager is currently only available in the Beyond Bleeding Edge container. So this is what you would have to choose in order to use Artifact Manager on JupyterHub. I'm already logged in, so let me show you how it would look inside the JupyterHub. So you would go in the Jupyter examples main, and then let's open the start here. This is the third example you would notice here. You can explore Fabric artifacts in the in the JupyterHub using this example. As earlier, Michael mentioned about the access of various artifacts. So this information is reiterated here. Some of the artifacts which have public access can be accessed by anybody. And then the artifacts which are project specific can only be accessed by the project members. So let me run this notebook, and then it's trying to pull all the information from Artifact Manager using the API. And now it shows all the examples which are available there on the Artifacts Manager. So each of the example here is may have multiple versions, as Michael earlier spoke about. But for example, most of them right now only have one version. So you can choose the version you want to download. You can click download here. For example, I downloaded the Chameleon facility ports, and the example got downloaded here. You can click on it. Each version would have its own respective directory. And then you have all the notebooks for that example available there. Then it's as simple as following through the notebook and running it to get the example there. Another thing I wanted to mention here is that all the examples published by Fabric team have on the screen, all the examples published here have tags. All the examples published by Fabric team are tagged as Fabric. And it's the tag only available for Fabric team, so no other examples would have this tag. So if you were looking for only the official examples, you could just filter on that. Or if you were looking for any specific examples, like, for example, if you were looking for P4 examples, you could filter on that too and click download. Those would also get downloaded. They get downloaded in your work directory, so you'll have to go there. So I can now see the P4 examples have also been downloaded. And then you can run these labs, I think, and follow through. Right now, we don't have the support in order to upload. We don't have a graphical user interface to upload artifacts from the JupyterHub, but we do have the support for the APIs. So I'm showing a couple of pages for the FabLib, which has API support for list artifacts, create artifact, and then upload a file to an artifact. So users can use this API to upload or create artifacts through the FabLib. We are currently working on adding support to provide a graphical interface on JupyterHub in order for you to upload the artifacts. That's coming in future. And this is just the first version of Artifact Manager display on JupyterHub. We are new to doing this in JupyterHub. If you have any feedback for us, it's always welcome. And if you'd like to help us improve this, that's welcome as well. That's all I have for the demo part. I'll pass it back on to Brittany.
Yes, thank you so much, both of you, Michael and Kamal, for that great presentation and demo. At this time, we will open up to the question and answer session. So we will look to see any questions that have been submitted. The first is, I'm a JupyterHub user. How can I help to contribute?
The Artifact Manager notebook is currently available in Jupyter Examples GitHub repository. We would like any kind of improvement or feedback from you. Feel free to create pull requests, contribute your code. We would love to see that.
Great, thank you. The second question is, can you upload an artifact from JupyterHub?
Right now, you can only upload the artifacts using the API interface using FabLib. We don't have the graphical interface implemented yet. We are working on adding the Jupyter Lab extensions for it. That's coming soon.
Perfect. Where is the documentation located?
That's an excellent question, and it's mostly in my head right now. It will be published to. I believe Komal had shown that link to Artifacts Manager earlier. When hovering over that, there'll be a pop-up that will take you to the documentation that's going to be landing in more or less like our Learn pages and the Confluence site. Similar to how the Credential Manager documentation was written, it's going to follow that same format. So I'd expect that to be within the next week that that's going to land there.
Okay, perfect. Why should I use the Artifacts Manager?
It simply if you're working on a project with more than just yourself, if you want to be able to reproduce or replicate research in a way that is less guesswork than checking something out from a repo or passing files manually, this allows you a means of pushing a known set of static files to a place that then can be pulled back in with some consistency, and then tested as such. So reproducible research. If you're just working by yourself, maybe you don't have a reason to do so. But if you're working within a team, or if you want to be able to kind of, would you say, collaborate with others on a small group, there's different visibility levels that you can set to share those files back and forth. And then, maybe you just keep them to yourself. Maybe you open them to the public someday. It entirely depends on what you want to do.
Okay, thank you. Does FabLib support the Artifacts Manager?
Yes, we do have the initial support for Artifact Manager in FabLib available. Please try it out. It's just the first version. If there are any bugs or if you run into any issues, feel free to create posts on the forum or reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you.
Thank you. Does Fabric have testbed federation right now? Also, is the federation possible with a private 5G testbeds or only with the testbeds within Fabric?
Fabric does have a way for you to connect different testbeds. You can using the facility ports. We do have facility ports to Cloud Lab, Chameleon, Open Cloud Testbed. So we do have that support. In order for you to request a federation with the private 5G testbed, we recommend that you try and get our office hours. We'd love to hear from you and learn more about it and then figure out a way forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was our last question. So I just want to say one more thank you to both of our speakers, Komal and Michael. We really appreciate your time. In addition to our presenters, we want to acknowledge the behind the scenes team that's listed here who worked diligently to bring this webinar to production. And also thank you to the audience for your participation in today's webinar. In addition to a recording of this webinar, we will also email everyone who has registered a list of resources. This slide deck will be shared along with our Connect with Us form. We hope that you will reach out to the Fabric team for questions and support. Our webinar tomorrow, Stitching Together Innovation with Fabric Users, featuring Benjamin Formby on the topic of AI ML experiments. Next month, we will have 2 webinars. The first is Stitching Together Innovation with Fabric Users, which will be on Tuesday, October 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern. And the second one is Mastering Fabric, Tips and Tricks webinar series on Monday, October 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern. The October 22nd webinar is geared towards existing users, and the October 21st webinar is geared towards new users. So we would appreciate it if you could forward the information to the relevant users in your communities. As a final reminder, please submit your Fabric matrix and make sure your project abstract in the portal is up to date, as we will use that information for outreach, including our website. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.